We have finally made it to the end of our Six Sigma and Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt training course, which is based on the Council for Six Sigma Certification's body of knowledge. If you have not done so already, you should download a copy of the Council's Yellow Belt Training Manual, which covers the 4th to 11th chapters of their complete study guide. The prerequisite White Belt training course covers the first 3 chapters. The training manual can be downloaded from the course description section for this course. But before attempting the 60-question Yellow Belt certification exam, we should take some time to review what we have learned so far in this training course. Because you will only have 3 chances to pass the exam with a score of 70% or greater in order to receive your dual Six Sigma and Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt certificates. This review will take about 3 hours to complete and has been split into 2 parts, after which you can take the timed exam whenever it is convenient for you. The Yellow Belt certification exam is 60 questions. To pass, you will need a score of 70% or greater. There are 44 Yellow Belt and 15 White Belt question banks used in this exam, and 1 question is randomly pulled from each of these banks, plus 1 additional general knowledge question. The first 5 questions will cover Module 1, where we discussed what is Six Sigma. The next 7 questions will cover Module 2, where we discussed Six Sigma history and application, followed by 3 questions that will cover Module 3, where we discussed other process improvement methods. There will be 6 questions on Module 4, Lean Concepts, followed by 5 questions on Module 5, which covered basic Six Sigma concepts. 4 questions will cover Module 6, Approaching the Problem, and 7 questions will cover Module 7, where we discussed what is a process. Moving right along, we will have another 4 questions that will cover Module 8, Quality. 3 more questions will cover Module 9 on selecting the right projects, followed by an additional 4 questions from Module 10, where we discussed basic Six Sigma team management, and that is followed by a final 10 questions which cover Module 11, where we introduced you to DMAC and DMADV. You may not take your exam while we are reviewing the information that will be on the exam. Once we have finished our review, then you may go ahead and take your exam. The system automatically timestamps the start and submission times for your exams, and any exam that is stamped as having been started while we are reviewing this information will be flagged for cheating, and your results may be invalidated. This review will take more than 3 hours to complete, split into 2 parts, and you will only have 2 hours to complete your exam. Any unanswered questions will be marked as incorrect. So even if you did cheat, your maximum possible score would only be 60%, which would be a failing score. Organizations often use the term Lean Six Sigma when describing a process improvement approach that incorporates tenets from both Six Sigma and Lean methodologies. This is a popular approach because the greatest results usually come when you improve a process so that both defects and wastes are eliminated. That statement rings true whether you are measuring from a business-driven bottom line or a customer satisfaction approach. A Six Sigma defect is a failure to meet a requirement in a process. Defects cost money because businesses have to replace parts, equipment, or products that are not perfect. Organizations also experience financial loss associated with defects when quality reputation is so low that customers choose not to return or purchase from the company. From a customer satisfaction standpoint, defects can increase the time it takes for a customer to get what they want or can cause the customer to be unhappy with the end product or service. Lean helps to reduce defects by removing waste from the process. Waste costs money because it is unnecessary time, labor, or material in a process. Generally, Waste is something that is used in the process that isn't required for a satisfactory outcome. In some cases, waste causes a customer satisfaction issue because it holds up the process or introduces undesirable elements or defects in the end product. The wastes are defined in Lean as Muda and was originally coined by Taiichi Ono in the development of the Toyota production system, which is the basis for Lean. There were originally 7 Muda defined, but since then, we have come to recognize 8 major wastes, which are defined through the acronym downtime. This stands for defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory excess, and motion waste. Beyond these deadly wastes, we also have the waste of ideas and a waste of excess capital. These are broken down into type 1 muda, which are wastes that are necessary for the process, and type 2 muda, which can be removed from the process because it adds no actual value to the end product. Taiichi Ono, who is considered to be the father of the Toyota production system, created a lean manufacturing framework which was based on the idea of preserving or increasing value with less work. Anything that does not increase value in the eye of the customer must be considered waste or muda, and every effort should be made to eliminate that waste. The following 8 lean manufacturing wastes, mostly derived from the Toyota production system, have a universal application in business today. The acronym for the 8 wastes is downtime, which stands for defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory excess, motion waste, and excess processing. Defects are mistakes that require additional time, resources, and money to fix. In a manufacturing process, a defect might involve a defective part that has to be remade. Overproduction is when workers just blindly keep producing, even when those who receive their output either are not ready for it or do not need it at all. This is a big flaw as it can tie up significant working capital. It is especially common in manufacturing, but can also occur in any workplace situation in which there is a bottleneck. Waiting occurs whenever work has to stop for some reason, because the next person in line is overwhelmed, because something broke down, because you are waiting for approval or materials, or because you have run out of something. Non-utilized talent was not part of the Toyota production system's 7 wastes, but is being increasingly seen within businesses today. Not or underutilizing people's talent, skills, and knowledge can have a detrimental effect on an organization. Transportation is caused by moving things around. This is less of a problem in a business office than in a manufacturing plant, since most of what white collar workers transport can be sent by email. Inventory excess is caused when there is a supply in excess of real customer demand, which makes real production. Any excess movement, whether by employees or machines, that does not add value to the product, service, or process is motion waste. And excess processing often occurs due to the creation of multiple versions of the same task or long winded, poorly designed processes. While Toyota originally defined 7 common muda, even Taiichi Ono agreed that other types of waste exist. In some cases, what seems like other types of waste are just more defined or specific types of the 8 muda we discussed. Some forms of waste don't seem to fit neatly into one of those 8 muda categories. Muda of ideas occurs when the thoughts and ideas of people are discounted, not sought out, or misappropriated in a way that doesn't make sense. Leadership and project teams can often overlook subject matter experts who have detailed insight into a process and, as such, could offer firsthand knowledge and ideas. The result could be the design of a process that works great in theory but falls flat on a granular level once it is instituted. One reason waste of ideas is such a common concern for organizations is that people themselves rarely come forward with thoughts. Staff members might think they don't have anything real to contribute, might feel that their ideas won't be heard, or could be anxious about looking silly or ignorant. Six Sigma green or black belts in charge of a project can facilitate less muda of ideas by encouraging subject matter experts to contribute and encourage leaders to seek all ideas before moving forward with a change. Brainstorming tools are valuable for this purpose because they are designed to create a safe haven for all ideas. By fostering all ideas in a safe environment, teams can foster valuable ideas and avoid waste of ideas. Saving for a rainy day is smart, but banking cash when there are profits to gain isn't always the right decision. The muda of capital or cash occurs when leadership decides not to invest in upgrades or improvements. That would create additional cash flow. This type of waste is very similar to waiting, except the cash itself is waiting, often for a time when leadership feels safe enough to spend it. Six Sigma helps reduce muda of cash because statistical analysis helps point leaders to decisions that involve the least risk or most gain. No business decision is 100% guaranteed, but Six Sigma helps leaders hedge bets by using statistical data in the decision making process so they don't sit on cash or capital that could be used to drive gains. All muda is waste that fails to add value to a product or process as defined by the customer or end user. All muda can also be divided into two types, which can help organize prioritize waste for project and improvement processes. Muda can be referred to as type 1 or type 2. Type 1 Muda are non-value added tasks that might actually be essential or required by circumstances. Inspection of products during process might be required if the process is known to produce defects. Organizations that don't want defects to reach customers, so they put quality controls in place. The act of inspection and the time and expenses it adds to a process are all Muda. However, an organization can't remove that waste until it addresses the cause of the defects within the process. Sometimes, auxiliary processes within an organization are type 1 Muda. For example, the external end customer doesn't receive a direct value from the human resources process within an organization. At the same time, if employees don't receive paychecks or support regarding benefits, they aren't likely to continue performing work. Those processes are then essential to the organization. Instead of removing the muda completely, teams might look for ways to make essential muda as efficient and cost effective as possible. Type 2 muda are non value added tasks that are not essential and can be immediately removed from a process. For example, if a product is carried to and from several workstations while it is being completed, it is likely type 2 muda of conveyance. By rearranging the workflow, teams might be able to reduce the muda by a substantial amount without making any actual changes to how the product is put together. Simply put, type 1 muda cannot be removed from a process completely or at all, whereas type 2 muda must be removed from a process whenever it presents itself, unless that removal will otherwise adversely affect another process further down the line. 5S is a Japanese lean approach to organizing a workspace so that by making a process more effective and efficient, it will become easier to identify and expunge muda. 5S relies on visual cues and a clean work area to enhance efficiencies, reduce accidents, and standardize workflows in order to reduce defects. During the sort phase, all items or materials in a workspace are reviewed, removing unneeded items and keeping necessary resources. The sort step lets you take inventory of an area, discover unused or wasted resources, and make room for reorganization. Sort can also be applied with computerized processes. Once the excess is removed from the work area, teams must provide a streamlined and easy to use location for everything necessary to the workspace. During the straighten phase, every item, tool, or material is given a home. To facilitate ongoing organization, the location of resources should be labeled clearly. The third phase in the 5S methodology is targeted to keeping the workplace clean and neat. Say so can also be translated to sweep, sanitize, or scrub. The goal is to shine the workspace by cleaning it, maintaining equipment, and returning items to the proper place after use. In a computerized environment, the shine phase can be accomplished by naming files in a manner that makes them easy to locate, keeping folder structures intact, and deleting or archiving the files that are no longer necessary. The standardize phase is used to maintain the progress achieved in all of the previous steps. By keeping high standards of orderliness in a place, the benefits of 5S methodology can be long term. The stress and speed of a daily workday can make it hard to keep up with the 5S standards. But if everyone is committed to working together, the benefits can be ongoing. 5S only works if everyone on the team or within the organization commits to the process. Employees must follow the rules that are set up for standardizing or sustaining the organization. Otherwise, the team enters a cycle of cleaning up after a period of failing to keep up with the standards of 5S. Just-in-time manufacturing, or JIT, is another lean concept that originated with Toyota. Originally, just-in-time manufacturing took a literal meaning. The goal of just-in-time manufacturing was to produce an output just in time or as needed by the customer. The customer was the person or process that required the output. Sometimes that meant the end customers, and other times the customer was a different employee or process within the organization. In a just-in-time processing situation, one machine might produce a part required by another machine. Just-in-time manufacturing means that the first machine supplies only the number of parts that the second machine can process. If the second machine can process one part per minute, the first machine is set up to produce one part per minute. You'll recognize this idea from the sections on Muda of inventory and overproduction. It's obviously not always possible to run a process just in time for the end user, but modern companies do try to come as close as possible. Using predictive analysis, companies attempt to estimate how many of each product will sell before they produce those products. In some cases, such as with book publishing, companies run a smaller number of items first. If those items sell well or sell out, the company orders bigger and bigger runs of the product. Some entrepreneurs have applied just-in-time manufacturing to DVD sales. These individuals and companies buy the rights to films that have never been released on DVD or Blu-ray before. They usually go after low-cost films that are likely to have a small cult or niche following. Because the demand is small, it isn't feasible to print and market these DVDs in a traditional fashion. However, the companies make a stable profit by selling the DVD through online retailers such as Amazon.com and printing the DVDs to order. Modern technology lets this process occur with minimal expense and waiting. Today, just-in-time mentalities are less about the literal idea of providing the product just in time. Rather, it has become a more general concept of lean manufacturing that helps organizations eliminate waste in a process. Six Sigma is a systematic approach to eliminating errors. That is, Six Sigma uses statistical methods to improve quality by minimizing variability in the business process, because it is generally understood that variation is the most common cause of defects occurring within a product. These defects are not defined by the business standards. Rather, they are defined by the voice of the customer. In other words, what quality means must be determined from the perspective of the customer. We use tools to obtain the input of the customer and to determine what the customer finds valuable in the end product and what they are not willing to pay for in the form of extras. Projects seek to identify the root causes of errors or defects within the process. This is accomplished through the use of proven tools and techniques such as the Pareto principle. The Pareto principle dictates that the vital few, that 20% of the causes result in 80% of the defects. After defining these variations, teams move to eliminate them from the process in order to reduce the defects. More importantly, unlike other quality programs that have come and gone over the years, Six Sigma is a team-based initiative that requires buy-in from every level of an organization in order to be truly successful. Leaders are needed to provide resources, capital, and support, while employees must be willing to accept a change in the workplace culture. Everyone plays a part in the continuous improvement of a process and of an entire organization, one project at a time. The driving goal of Six Sigma is to reduce defects. By reducing defects, teams can increase productivity, decrease overall costs, increase customer satisfaction, and create maximum profits. One idea inherent in the Six Sigma methodology is that variance is the root of many defects. Add variation in the process and consistency is lost. When consistency is lost, defects are introduced. Variation makes for inconsistent quality. It is important to note that removing variation alone doesn't always improve quality. Six Sigma process improvement teams usually take a two-step approach to improvements. First, they have to determine if the process is functional. Once the team determines that the process can be changed, they make improvements to remove the variation that causes outputs to deviate from the result intended by the recipe. The statistical measure used by teams to understand variation in a process is known as standard deviation. Standard deviation is represented in math by the lowercase Greek letter sigma. Standard deviation measures the distance between data points and the mean of all data. A large standard deviation means an overall wide spread of points, while a smaller standard deviation means a closely clustered set of points. To begin the standard deviation calculation, you need to know the mean for the population. The mean is represented mathematically by the Greek letter mu. Me is calculated by adding all of the numbers and dividing that sum by the number of items in the dataset. The formula calls for you to take each number in the dataset, subtract the mean from it, and square the result. The rest of the formula under the square root sign simply tells you to add up all the numbers you just calculated and divide by n, where n is the number of items in your dataset. Or to put it another way, you need to find the mean of the new set of numbers you just calculated. The standard deviation is the square root of the variance. Now, when calculating the standard deviation from a sample, you need to divide by n minus 1 instead of n to get the variance, as a way to make up for some of the accuracy lost in using sampling. The Pareto principle, also called the 80-20 rule, says that 20% of the causes lead to 80% of the defects. This is also called the law of the vital few. The vital few inputs drive the majority of the outputs. The Pareto principle was first suggested by a management consultant named Joseph Juran. Juran named the principle for Vilfredo Pareto, an economist in Italy who once wrote that 20% of the nation's people owned 80% of its land. The principle has become known in various circles. Business professionals commonly state that 80% of sales come from 20% of the customers, and volunteer organizations usually operate with 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. The principle is critical to Six Sigma, not because causes and effects line up nicely via an 80-20 breakdown, but because it almost universally applies that a few inputs create more impact than all other inputs combined. Individuals seeking to reduce defects can almost always identify 3 to 4 major inputs that, if improved, will create a dramatic impact on the outcome. While resources, costs, and difficulty of improvements also play a role in solution selections, understanding which inputs or root causes are high on a Pareto chart lets project teams determine where improvements will make the biggest impact to the bottom line. The Pareto principle is best displayed using a Pareto chart, which is a graphical representation of data elements, usually inputs or causes, in a ranked bar chart. Unlike a regular bar chart, the bars are arranged in order of height, with the highest on the left and the lowest on the right. Statistical software used to create such charts adds formatting and other elements automatically. But you can also create a basic Pareto chart using simply Excel. A Pareto chart often uncovers low-hanging fruit, which are projects that can result in easy wins for a newly established Six Sigma team. They allow for a successful project that can increase the organization's bottom line and encourage leadership to buy into more complex projects in the future. The voice of the customer is a foundational concept of Six Sigma. The goal of quality is to make a better, more consistent product. One of the ways you know you have reached this goal is that your customers will be more consistently satisfied. The only way to reach this goal is to seek feedback from the customer, making voice of the customer data critical to collect before, during, and after improvement projects. Successful voice of the customer programs are proactive and constant in their desire for feedback, and technology makes it possible to seek customer feedback in numerous ways. Some methods for capturing feedback include surveys via telephone, mail, email, or online, focus groups in person or online, interviews, beta or user testing, feedback forms, customer complaints, social media or site interaction, reviews, and forums. The voice of the customer can be sought as a means to clarify needs and desires, clarify specific problems with the process, or as a regular part of improvement. Customer service and marketing agendas asking the right questions in the right way helps create a powerful voice of the customer campaign that provides usable data for Six Sigma teams. General customer feedback is often obtained through feedback forms, customer complaint records, and passive information gathering via websites or social media. Through such methods, organizations are usually testing general waters to get a temperature reading. General voice of the customer feedback is often used as a smoke alarm. A smoke alarm is designed to alert individuals in a business, home, or other building that smoke is present and people within the building can take action. Often, the alarm saves lives and can reduce damage associated with a potential fire. For specific feedback, you have to ask specific questions. This is especially true if you are seeking additional information or clarification of general feedback. When designing your own voice of the customer tool, keep in mind how you intend to use the information gained. If you want to input the data into statistical analysis software to test hypotheses or create visual charts, then you need to ask questions using the Likert scale. Metrics are heavily utilized when applying Six Sigma to process and process improvements, requiring that anyone working in a Six Sigma environment be familiar with many Six Sigma metrics, like standard deviation. The equation for defects per million is the number of defects in a sample divided by the number of opportunities for a defect in that sample, which is then multiplied by a million. Defects per unit is measured of how many defects there are in relation to the number of units tested. The metric is concerned with total number of defects, and one unit could have more than one defect. It is calculated by dividing the number of defects found by the number of units in the sample. The defects per unit provides an average level of quality. It tells you how many defects on average each unit can be expected to have. First-time yield is the ratio of units produced to the units attempted to produce. For example, if you put 12 cookies in an oven, but only 10 come out edible, then you haven't produced 12 cookies. It is calculated by dividing the number of good units produced by the number of units entering the process. The rolled throughput yield, or RTY, provides a probability that a unit will be generated by a process without defects. One of the main differences between rolled throughput yield and basic yield or first time yield is that the RTY considers whether rework was needed to generate the number of final units. This is a valuable concern because organizations don't always think about the rework that is inherent in a process, which means they often measure a process and deem it successful even when Muda is present. The roll throughput yield is calculated in a similar manner to the first time yield, but it takes rework into account. If process A from the first time yield example only achieved a yield of 95% because someone reworked 5 items to make them good, then the rolled throughput yield calculation adds 5 instances of rework into the ratio. The formula is the number of units entering minus any scrap and rework divided by the number of units entering the process. The rolled throughput yield doesn't always provide an indication of final production or sales, but a low RTY indicates that there is waste in the process in the form of rework. Understanding how to approach the problem, beginning to identify the problem and defining it with a statement is critical to creating a foundation for successful Six Sigma projects. We always start by identifying the problem. Sometimes the cause can be found easily, while other times the root cause can be complex and may even intertwine into other processes. We have to be specific in defining the root cause, because this will affect the level of success for the project. When a root cause is not well defined, it can lead to scope creep and result in the waste of time, money, and resources. A well-defined root cause will be included in the problem statement, which is the foundation to any Six Sigma project. It is a core part of the project charter, and it allows teams to plan and coordinate the resources and skills that a project will ultimately lead. With a well-defined root cause and a strong problem statement, we can then schedule the project around what we consider to be a success. To get that definition, though, we need to have a strong and capable team, as well as a good brainstorming session using one or a combination of multiple root cause analysis tools. The most popular tool is the Ishikawa diagram, or fishbone diagram, as it is most commonly referred to. Taiichi Ono introduced the 5 whys into the Toyota production system, and we can also use it today to find the root cause, either as a sole tool or in combination with the fishbone diagram in order to granularize the process. Because Six Sigma approaches things with a statistical mindset, it considers all problems as a function. The y equals fx statement can be used in 2 ways. First, it is a general map for stating a problem. Y, the problem, occurs because of some x, input or cause, is occurring. In reality, Y is usually occurring because of some group of causes or inputs, which means there are going to be more than one X inputs. The idea can also be applied to specific processes and outcomes within the problem. As you get more and more granular, the y equals fx concept becomes increasingly mathematical. In many cases, you can graph the relationship between the output y and the input x. It's not always so easy to conduct the research and analysis to find the relationship, but the relationship is always present. Some examples of a y equals fx relationship includes the low customer satisfaction with hamburger taste as a function of an uncalibrated grill, or low employee morale as a function of a poor time off approval system. Customer wait times are also a function of technology distractions for employees. In each of these examples, we can quantify the relationship with a correlation and regression analysis. If we had the necessary data in the correct format, we can compare different grilling temperatures to the taste of cooked burgers with the help of a focus group, or compare the number of no-call no-shows with the average number of days to approve a time-off request by human resources. We just need to make sure that we collect continuous data or data that can be measured, because it is easier to compare and test hypotheses when the data is any number of infinites in between a whole number. Data analysis is one of the best ways to validate a y equals fx assumption, but teams who are familiar with processes can often arrive at some basic relationships through a process known as the 5 whys. This is a brainstorming tool that asks increasingly granular why questions about a problem or process, seeking to understand the root cause or actual problem. The 5 whys can be used to define a problem or to begin seeking causes. The tool is called the 5 whys because it often leads to answers within 5 questions. However, teams could ask a dozen questions if they begin at a very high level and work down through a complex process. One benefit of 5 whys is that it only costs your team a small amount of time to use. A team familiar with a process can conduct a complete 5 whys session in less than an hour if a moderator keeps things on track. Because of its simplicity, the 5 whys tool can be used for almost any problem. Use it to address a problem team members bring up, to address a problem a supervisor noticed, or to address the vague feelings that there is a problem when no one has been able to define what is actually wrong. At the very least, a 5 whys session facilitates communication and thought. In a Six Sigma project environment, 5 whys is usually deployed when processes involve human interaction or people-powered inputs, though it can be an effective start to brainstorming on any process. Since a 5 whys session is usually based on input from subject matter experts, gather people who are close to the process. On a whiteboard or web conference screen, display a basic problem statement as you would understand it. The team works together to provide a high-level answer to that question. Write the answer down under the question, then create the highest level why question you can about that new answer. Then ask a question regarding the answer and add it to the board under the answer to the first question. Each time this process is completed, step by step, it produces a more granularized look at the root cause. A Six Sigma improvement project usually starts with a formal project statement. This is different from the basic statements used to launch a 5 whys session. A strong problem statement is similar to a 30-second elevator pitch, which executives and salespeople across the globe use to hook clients or business inventors on an idea. The problem statement, like that pitch, provides just enough information that a busy executive can understand what the issue is and why there is a need for an improvement effort. Project statements should include where and when the problem was recorded or was occurring, a measurement of the magnitude for the problem, preferably with some tie to cost, a brief description of the problem that could be understood by professionals who are not closely aligned with the process, and a brief notation about the metric used to measure or describe the problem. When you first start writing problem statements, it is sometimes harder than you might expect to get all of the information into a couple of sentences. To avoid leaving out information, it helps to use a list and consider yourself a problem statement journalist. When journalists write a report, they are looking to answer some specific questions. What happened? Who did it happen to? When did it happen? Why does the audience care? Use a checklist to construct the problem statement, and then ask yourself if someone could answer all of the questions in the checklist from your problem statement alone. Before you present your statement to a boss or other decision maker, test it out with a coworker or someone who is not as familiar with the issue as you are. Another way to tell if you have a strong problem statement is that you can create an overall project objective statement or goal directly from the problem statement. Specific problem and objective statements are critical to Six Sigma project success for several reasons. Being as specific as possible sets up appropriate expectations. Creating strong problem statements lay a stable foundation for the rest of your project, gives the team a beacon when they get overwhelmed, and reduces the chances of scope creep and misunderstanding. In Six Sigma, we call any activity which converts an input into a value-added output a process. Because of how broad this definition is, we can consider that an entire organization is therefore one big process, which is then composed of an unlimited number of subprocesses, which are also composed of even more processes under them. This granularization is residual, down to the smallest possible, which can be as simple as a single act like turning on a light bulb. All that is required is that it takes some form of input and turns it into a value-added output. We often use SIPOC diagrams to map out a process, and even something as simple as turning on a light bulb can be mapped this way, with the operator and power company being suppliers, the electricity and a finger being the inputs, the light switch being the process, the light is the output, and the operator is the customer. Beyond the SIPOC diagram, we identify processes and define them in value streams and standard operating procedures. A process is a collection of tasks, steps, or activities that are performed, usually in a specific order, and result in an end product such as a tangible good or the provision of a service. In a business, multiple processes work together to achieve organizational goals. Technically, the business or organization itself can be seen as one enormous process. To define and maintain proper scope, a Six Sigma team has to identify the processes that were related to a process improvement or project. Before we begin defining the components of a process, let's peel back the layers of this concept known as a process. Whether physical, digital, or ideological, every process is a series of some number of steps. You can put these steps on paper in the form of instructions, often called a standard operating procedure, in a formal business training or policy document, or in a visual diagram known as a process map. Processes all take a certain amount of time, and processing time can change with a variety of factors. Process maps and documents can only record information such as the average time a process takes or measures of variation in the processing time. This information is often noted in such documents because it provides valuable information to teams. But real-time observation of a process is almost always provides better information about processing time. Almost any process in a business will be dependent upon one or more other processes. Remember, the business itself is a series of linked processes all working towards the same goal or goals. Sometimes interdependencies are noted on a process map. Other times, interdependencies are resource related. When working with processes during a Six Sigma improvement project, teams must be aware of interdependencies. Processes require resources, like a motor requires fuel or electricity to run. A process requires resources such as power, people, cash, digital bandwidth, computer equipment, machinery, supplies, parts, and even skills. Since someone in an organization has to approve and pay for these resources, project teams must understand the resources involved, the cost of those resources, so that they can make appropriate requests when needed. Processes are made of components that include inputs, outputs, events, tasks or activities, and decisions. Inputs enter the process when a specific event occurs. Tasks and decisions are performed upon or with the inputs. At the end of the process, an output is generated. Input refers to anything that enters a process or is required to enter a process to drive the creation of an output. Inputs or the results of those inputs can cause errors or defects in the process. The output of a process is the service or product that is used by the customer of the process. The process customer is not always the traditional end customer who purchase a product or service. Customers can be internal or external. In some cases, the customer of a process is not even a person. Many processes feed other processes. From a Six Sigma perspective, an output is almost always of more value to the ultimate process than the input is. The process itself involves adding value of some kind to the inputs. Events are specific, predefined criteria or actions that cause a process to begin working. A process that performs well responds to an event just like a light bulb responds to the action of a switch being pulled. Six Sigma teams must determine what events trigger a process because it helps them to understand why a process is being performed and whether the process is being run when it doesn't need to be. Tasks or activities are the heart of a process. Just as the heart pumps blood through your body, the tasks within a process pump the inputs through, turning them into the outputs. Tasks are the physical, automated, or computerized actions within a process. Decisions are closely related to tasks and can be tasks themselves. Decisions within a process are typically governed by a set of rules. Sometimes those rules are formally documented. Other times, decisions are made via informal rules along with staff knowledge and experience. You're probably noticing that processes can be extremely complex, and the relationship between all the components are equally complex. Inputs can be outputs from previous processes, outputs can be inputs in the next process. All of these are related. As teams work to improve processes, they need to understand who the process owners are. Depending on the business organization, process owners can be the people with the power to approve changes. In some organizations, the lowest level owner might not have veto or decision power about all changes, but he or she is held responsible for the performance of the process. A process owner can be a person in charge of a very specific process or function, a team supervisor or department manager, or even an executive level individual who is probably responsible for a number of processes in his or her division. The responsibilities of a process owner are often defined by the infrastructure of a specific business. But commonly, a process owner will monitor how the process performs, usually using one or more metrics or regularly reported data elements. They will understand how the process fits into the overall business, why the output of the process is critical to business goals, and what inputs feed the process. They may ensure the process is documented via standard operating procedures and that process documentation is kept current and accurate. They may also be responsible for ensuring that operators within the process have the resources and training they need to complete their jobs. In a Six Sigma environment, process owners might also ensure a control plan is in place and regularly review the process for possible improvement opportunities. All processes generate some form of data. Even if data isn't yet being captured, information is inherent in any process. A computer program that automatically routes work in a workflow might generate data such as the number of items in a work queue, how many items were worked that day, the time items have been waiting in queue, how many times the items were transferred, and where those items were transferred to. A process for filling bottles with liquid might generate data such as how much liquid is placed in each bottle, how many bottles per hour were filled, and perhaps variation between bottles. Data is extremely valuable to Six Sigma teams because it is often how they define whether a process is in control and successful. The type of data that is collected from a process can also be very complex, especially in the case of automated systems where the data can be voluminous and therefore difficult to work with. That data can be either discrete or a count, or it can be continuous, which is a measurement consisting of any infinite value between two whole numbers. To make this even more complicated, there are four different levels of data, which includes nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. The type of data you have access to will determine how well you can analyze a process, and in some cases, a Six Sigma team may have to create new systems for measuring a process that have not been measured by an organization previously. The SIPOC diagram is often an important part of the define phase of a Six Sigma project, but you can use the SIPOC diagram anytime you want to learn more about a process or understand how a process in a business environment is linked to other processes. SIPOC stands for suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. For the purpose of a SIPOC, inputs and outputs follow the same guidelines described previously. Suppliers are the people, processes, and organizations that supply inputs to your process. Customers are the people, processes, and organizations that make use of the outputs of your process. The process itself is a series of steps that take the inputs to make them outputs. The SIPOC diagram is one of the most often used tools for understanding process components and process relevance because it is so effective and simple. Teams can create SIPOC diagrams in a single brainstorming session, though effective diagramming usually requires the presence of a process owner and one or more subject matter experts who are familiar with the process on a daily level. SIPOC diagrams are also infinitely scalable. Teams can diagram processes at a very minute level, but they can also use to diagram an entire business. We walked through the creation of SIPOC diagrams and also provided some examples at various levels previously. You can create a SIPOC diagram as an individual exercise or with a team environment. SIPOC can be created using a computer and software tools such as Word or Excel, but you can also draw them freehand on whiteboard or a piece of paper. Freehand diagram is a valuable brainstorming tool because teams can quickly edit the rough draft of the diagram as they discuss a process. As you diagram your own processes, they can tend to look messy at first with edits, arrows, and scratchouts, and inserts. Editing or putting rules on the brainstorming session can limit the ideas and information that flow during the process. Remember, you can always create a clean copy of the diagram for presentation purposes later once you are finished the brainstorming session. One of the best ways to create an initial SIPOC diagram during a team session is on large pieces of paper or whiteboard. Before beginning a SIPOC session, set a definition for where your process or responsibility begins and ends. If you don't understand the scope of your process, then your SIPOC session can get out of hand or produce a diagram that isn't useful for your project. A SIPOC diagram is based on swim lanes. Swim lanes let you show how cross-functional activities and resources relate to your process. A SIPOC diagram gets 5 lanes, one each for suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. Create swim lanes by drawing them on the whiteboard or hang a piece of paper for each swim lane on the wall. To keep the session from turning into a detailed process mapping activity, ask the team to describe the process in less than 5 to 7 steps. Keep things simple by limiting process steps to short verb-noun combos such as enter information, collect money, or place labels. Once you have a rudimentary process definition, begin with either inputs or outputs. Ask the team, what does this process make? What comes out of this process? Those answers go into the output swim lane. Provide the team with sticky notes and markers. Write on the sticky notes instead of writing directly on the whiteboard or paper. This lets you move components around quickly as you go through the diagram. You can divide the idea of inputs into two types, if you like. First, you have actual inputs, the goods and services that are transformed by the process to create the outputs. Second, you have the enablers of the process. These aren't technically inputs because they don't enter the process and aren't changed by the process. Instead, they are required for the process to function. Ensuring that you understand the process at this high level is accurate by validating the diagram. If you put together a comprehensive team that includes subject matter experts, the team can validate most of the information on its own. But it's always a good idea to get a second opinion on anything the team isn't sure about. Invite other subject matter experts or process owners to review the diagram briefly with the team and, of course, provide feedback.